Welcome to the inside, Linda. Nice to have you here. Just been on the Engawa or on the deck here for a few months at least. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's wonderful. So it's nice. Things are beginning to shift in our world a little bit with the vaccinations and yeah, I think we're going to hit another period of time with a lot of adjustment, and hopefully that leans towards relief and joy, although I think it will probably be a mixed bag in many ways. Also, the cherry blossoms this morning, the first just 2 or 3 here, and the temple cherry blossom out in the front of the building have started to come. So these are very beautiful cherry blossoms that bloom here. So I encourage you sometime over the next week or 2 weeks to stop by the temple and offer incense and see the cherry blossoms. I heard many of the cherries in Salem were really severely damaged in the ice storm a few weeks ago. My parents, where I grew up, is just a short walk to the Capitol building there, and we'd always go and see the cherries there, which were donated by someplace in Japan. I can't remember what. So anyway, I like cherry blossoms. So my favorite, those apple blossoms. They will come soon. So the past few weeks, I've been attempting to talk about the great vehicle, the Mahayana. And typically, when people hear the word Mahayana, they think of it as a classification of Buddhism. Like there is the Theravadan Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, Vajrayana Buddhism. And that's the way that we oftentimes hear that word, great vehicle teachings. And that's fine. That gives us some way to contextualize different kinds of teaching. But what I'm talking about here is not simply a kind of way of classifying teachings, but talking about the great vehicle, the teaching of the great vehicle. This is completely core to the practice of Zazen as we've received it through the lineages of Dogen and Keizan Zenji. And that's why I'm talking about. The Mahayana isn't something which is easy to talk about in an explanatory way. Its meaning is not clear in the way that many things' meanings are clear. And yet it's the core. And it's why the Buddha Dharma can reach us. It's why you and I can sit in this hall or at home on your computer. I don't think anyone's sitting in the yard today. And the Buddha Dharma can encounter us, and we can encounter it. We chant in the morning before the talk. We say, this wondrous Dharma is rarely met with even in 100,000 million kalpas. It's so rare to meet it. But it's not rare to meet it because it is only in a rarefied place. It is because our minds are so stuck in grasping that again and again we grasp after the meaning, we grasp after the significance, we grasp after some way of making sense with our provisional mind. And with that mind, this Dharma, this great vehicle, can never be encountered. It's easily ignored. It's so profound that it takes almost nothing for us to miss it. So intimate that as our mind goes out to touch other things, we just leave it behind with no effort at all. I was asking myself this question this morning, when we're on talk number 4, and I'm not exactly sure what I'm doing, I ask myself, why am I talking about this? It started out because I didn't know what to talk about, and I asked some people around the temple, and Joichi said, well, why don't you talk about the great vehicle? You could call it, what's so great about the great vehicle? And I thought, oh, that sounds pretty good. And we decided that on Friday, and then I came up with something on Sunday. And so maybe that's the way it started. But really, the reason I'm talking about this is because I'm afraid. I'm afraid for our world. We need medicine. We deeply need this medicine of the great vehicle. And so I turn to it again and again and again in my own individual life and within the life of the temple, the life of my family, life of the community. And while I have fear for our collective lives, I also have a hope. I know there's another way. Whether we can really transform the way we're living, or we have to go through another cycle of destruction, perhaps disappear as humans altogether and appear as something else. And after kalpas, to reach a higher stage than we've met now. Perhaps that's our path, I don't know. But my hope isn't located so much in time. It's not located in when we'll be able to do it, but in the actuality of this vehicle, which is the liberation of all beings. In the Lotus Sutra, in the second chapter of the Lotus Sutra called Skillful Means, the Buddha says, only a Buddha together with a Buddha can fully understand the true character of all things. It's a very curious statement. Sometimes people play with it a little bit and they translate it as something like, only Buddhas can fully understand the true character of all things, or only in the presence of Buddhas, or they say different things, but the Chinese is very interesting here. It says, only a Buddha together with a Buddha can fully understand the true character of all things. Very enigmatic phrase. Only a Buddha together with a Buddha. This is even more complicated if we take into consideration that the traditional teaching is that a world system can only have one Buddha. A world system meaning like everything you could fathom, like we would call it the cosmos, right? That's one world system. There's bajillions and bajillions of them in a Buddhist understanding. And so our world system would say that only can be one Buddha at a time. It's a little bit like, was it Darth Maul or something? That's only one. Isn't that what, like one, isn't there only like it's about to be one dark Jedi at a time or something like that? Yeah. Anyway, so only one Buddha at a time. This is the traditional teaching. And even still in the Lotus Sutra, it says, a Buddha together with a Buddha. A Buddha is both a singular, but to fathom the true character of things, it must be a Buddha and a Buddha. I'm just going to leave that there without too much explanation. In the awakening of faith in the Mahayana, which here, the great vehicle, the Mahayana, is a teaching about living through the true character of all things, which only a Buddha and a Buddha together with a Buddha can fully understand. It says, the dharma is the mind of sentient beings. This mind includes in itself all states of being, of the phenomenal and transcendental worlds. I remember when I first read this, it just shattered my brain. Dharma is the mind of sentient beings. Buddha Dharma, awakening, is the mind of all sentient beings. It's not the awakening that gets around, gets through, transforms. None of that. It is the mind of all sentient beings. This mind includes in itself all states of being in the phenomenal and transcendental world. That phenomenal and transcendental world is kind of a technical term in Buddhism. It means everything plus everything times everything, right? Like anything you could conceive of as being existent, right? The phenomenal and the transcendental world, right? All states of being. This mind includes in itself. Right? All states that we could imagine are this mind. This is right at the front of the awakening of faith in the Mahayana. Okay, I'll leave that there for a second. I'm going to come back to these as we go along. And so the question arises, what is the Lord to do? I don't mean Jesus here. I mean the Lord of the house. I mean your intention. Last week I was reading about these dialogues between a famous monk, Muso Osho, and the shogun's brother. And they talk about the Dharma. And one of the things I love about that particular book that I was reading from Dialogues in a Dream is its actual record of this kind of dialogues. But this dialogue is going on inside of us all the time. You know, your intention, is the brother or the sister of the shogun. Your own mind, your own deciding what you're going to do moment after moment, day after day, encounter after encounter. What will I do? You're the Lord. You're the ruler. You have that in you. That's part of your consciousness. How do I conduct myself? Right? This is a central question of practice. How should I live? What is there to do and what should not be done? Now, when we just talk about it in terms of how do I conduct myself, it gets a little bit too small. That's why I like this story about this dialogue between the monk and the shogun's brother, because I hear that dialogue in my mind all the time. When I think about just myself, am I the monk? Am I the shogun's brother? I don't know. Both of those beings are inside of me. When I ask myself the question, how do I conduct myself? This multifaceted, ungraspable me is what I'm referring to. Multifaceted, ungraspable self. If you pay attention, it's frustrating when you want to control it, that it doesn't just kind of do what you want it to do, and then you realize it's you that's wanting to do it. But what is that you that wants to do it that already is multifaceted? So even your wanting to do it is suspect in terms of it being a unitarity inspiration. Right? It's quite messy in there. There's all kinds of things going on. Hallelujah, by the way, because if the Lord was just in control, if the shogun's brother was in control, and there was no monk, it's not a good situation actually. When power dominates. We need power. We need to be able to move. We need to be able to make decisions. Efficacy in itself is not a problem. But if only that part of our being which makes choices and decides is the one that rules, we're in big trouble. Because it will fashion the world in a very narrow, exclusive image of its own goals. So when I ask this question, what is the Lord to do? How do I conduct myself? Right? All of these beings, every being that could appear is mind. And that mind itself is dharma. This is the Mahayana. Later on in the awakening of faith in the Mahayana, this is a part that I've read at assemblies here for many, many years, so many of you have probably heard it before. I think of it as the Hallelujah section of the awakening of faith in the Mahayana. All beings, since their first aspiration, till the attainment of Buddhahood are sheltered under the guardianship of all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, who, responding to the requirements of the occasion, transform themselves and assume the actual forms of personality. Thus, for the sake of all beings, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas become sometimes their parents, sometimes their spouses and children, sometimes their kinsmen, sometimes their servants, sometimes their friends, sometimes their enemies, sometimes reveal themselves as devas or some other forms. Again, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas treat all beings, sometimes with the 4 methods, sometimes with the 6 paramitas, or with some other deeds, all of which are the inducement for them to make their enlightenment perfect. Thus, embracing all beings with their deep compassion, with their meek and tender heart, as well as their immense treasure of blissful wisdom, Buddhas convert them in such a way as to suit their needs and conditions, while all beings thereby are enabled to hear or to see the Buddhas and thinking of Tathagatas or some other personages to increase their root of merit. It goes on and on. But from the very first place where we seek, where we have an aspiration to awaken, to live out a life of liberation that isn't only about our own liberation, but is about the liberation of all beings. From that moment, the awakening of faith in the Mahayana says the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas know us. And they not only know us, but they appear again and again and again. And this list here, sometimes their parents, sometimes their spouses and children, sometimes their kinsmen, sometimes their servants, sometimes their friends, sometimes their enemies, sometimes reveal themselves as devas or in some other forms. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas appear in these forms over and over and over again for the purposes of bringing us farther along the path of awakening, the path of the Buddha, the great vehicle. This is what's meant by skillful means. This is central teaching of the Mahayana, that the Buddha teaches through skillful means. The Buddha is always meeting us where we are, right? Is presenting us an opportunity for awakening through whatever it is that we encounter. It is different than saying everything is good. You know, like I grew up in a family where I'm very thankful for this. We had this kind of mind that everything happens for a reason, right? Which I don't think is really true, but I'm glad I was raised that way. Because it wasn't, how do I find fault with the world? That wasn't the discipline. It was to find meaning. Which is different than saying, actually everything has a meaning. That's a little different. That's how we said it. But the discipline that we had to engage in was to uncover meaning, to find significance in our life. You see how different this is than the idea that awakening would be about getting away from the world, about getting away from the current problems, about getting away from the current situation that we not only find ourselves in, but we have created, and we create again and again. And so this teaching of skillful means, this appearance of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in many forms, again and again and again. Once we give rise to the thought of awakening, once we think, I want to live a life that has deep importance. I want to live that way. Well, then you meet things that way. Meet the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas that are teaching you again and again and again. person who drives slow in the left-hand lane on the highway, they are your friend. Or at least your teacher. So I don't mind the people who drive slow. I don't like the people who drive fast and then slow and then fast and then slow and then fast and then slow. And when you try to pass them, they get mad at you. That's my real challenge. So this arising of the mind of awakening, this is central to the Mahayana teaching. It's called bodhicitta, the mind of awakening. Okay? The mind that seeks the way. Hear that, the mind that seeks the way is not the mind that finds the way, right? It's not the mind that establishes what is true from what is not true. It is not the mind that figures out why it's right and other things are wrong, or why it's wrong and other things are right. The mind that seeks the way is seeking. So seek. Humble yourself to the world. Humble yourself to the world. How much we puff ourselves up. Oh, the insurrection in January, those people, they're the ones that are messing everything up. Every time you tell yourself that, every time you remind yourself of that, who does it serve? I'm not saying we shouldn't be aware of it. I'm not saying we shouldn't be worried about it. I'm not saying that nothing should be done about it. But I'm saying, who does it serve? The outrage. And can you continue to seek when you swaddle yourself in that kind of self-righteousness? You can't. The seeking requires you to humble yourself to the world. What is the meaning there? What is the meaning of where we stand as a people, as a country? I was talking with my daughters on Friday night. 6 Asian women killed. 2 other people who weren't Asian women, but shot. Where else does this happen? Where people just buy a gun and go someplace and just shoot some people? I'm sure there's other places, but it doesn't make any sense. I had just been talking with them a week or so before about how frustrated I was that it seems like people are not really tuned into the experience of Asian American people. When we talk about racism, it seems like they're always left aside. And my oldest daughter, Anzu, said, "No duh, Dad. I'm 5 foot, weigh 100 pounds, Asian. Don't pay attention to me." We have become an isolated people, a brutal people. And I'm not talking about someone else. I'm talking about us. I'm talking about an addiction to a self-view. This is fundamental to what the Buddha talked about when he said that we live in suffering because of grasping. There's a first and second noble truth. Dukkha, the first noble truth, and clinging or craving, the second noble truth. And the primary thing, there are many things we cling to and crave, but the primary thing is self-view. Gakken is what they call it in Japanese. Clinging to self-view. And as we continue to be so individualistic, not a Buddha and a Buddha. That's not our quest. Our quest is the Buddha is going to find out what the truth is, and there's going to be me. or it's going to be somebody who I can submit to. The Buddha and the Buddha. This self-view that we're so addicted to, it makes it very difficult for us to actually seek. Because we think seeking means I'm going to find it out there, or I'm going to find it in here. Those are the two possibilities. You see, but in seeking, when we're humbling ourselves to the world, when we're actually meeting circumstances, and we're undergoing the discipline of meaning, of making meaning, of finding the truth in it, that doesn't come from one side or the other. It comes from relinquishing the self-view. The mind of all sentient beings is the dharma. It's excruciating. It's excruciating inwardly and outwardly to live in such isolation. And my guess is that you experience this. Inwardly, we can't find a place of repose. And outwardly, we need to keep pushing on things to get some measure of rest. Well, last week, when I was telling the story about the king no thought of comfort, which Muso Osho brings up in his dialogue with the brother of the shogun, we're talking about purity and defilement. Such intense words. But these are core to Buddhist teaching. This self-clinging, this self-view, this is defilement. This is what Buddhism says is the thing which continues to pollute life. It causes suffering. It causes all these strands of difficulty that we experience through our living. Now, the thing that's I love about that story, and we'll talk about it here in a moment, is even to say purity and defilement. I mean, what could be more defiled than that, right? To split the world into two and talk about the pure and the defiled. Right? But to teach, the Buddha has to say something, right? The Buddha has to give us something. That's why it's called skillful means, because the Buddha gives us some teaching which meets us where we are. And yet when we try to hold on to it as the truth, and then it becomes our view, and we stop seeking, and we stop humbling ourselves, and then we just know that we're right. That's the opposite of waking up. And so the Buddha is willing to tell us something. It's not a lie, but it's not the truth. The Buddha says, defilement, that defilement of the mind, this is what creates the world of suffering. So you should purify it. But what does that mean to purify? Purity and defilement set against each other, splitting the world in two. That defilement, we just replicate it again as we try to become pure, as we try to humble ourselves to the world, as we try to be open, as we try to have a mind that isn't so afflicted by anger and greed, fear. We split the world in two. We're riddled with this kind of dualism of the heart. Jerking back and forth, split into two, self-love and self-loathing, just running through our consciousness all the time. This is why the story of the king, no thought of conflict, I find so inspiring. And just quickly, the story for those of you who weren't here for last week's talk. This is a story that is from a kind of obscure sutra, I think, and Muso Osho is telling it to the shogun's brother in this dialogue, where the brother asks, the shogun's brother asks about a true life of prosperity. What really will make a life prosper? You know, what would make a good life? The word in Chinese is like it's like prosperity or luck, I guess. And it's right that the Lord would ask about that, right? I mean, you should be asking about that too. The Lord that is in you should be thinking, how can I make things work? Right? How can I make life better? And so he tells him this story where there's a king no thought of conflict. He's not just a king like of a particular area in a country that we know of. He's a wheel-turning king. He's like a celestial king. He's like a god, right? And one of his advisors, who is a Brahmin, has a child who becomes a Tathagata, who becomes the Buddha of that world system. And the king no thought of comfort is paying respects to this Tathagata, is bringing all kinds of gifts, builds a massive park that's all paved with gold, and this huge tower that's all filled with different kinds of precious gems, and burning lamps for just days and days and days upon end, doing all these kind of venerative activities. And when the Brahmin goes to talk with their child who has become this Buddha, the Buddha says, oh, this is fine, but you know, the king is doing it all to produce good results. And so in his attachment to producing good results, he can't really find the true vehicle. And so the Brahmin goes back to the king and tells him of this, and the king goes into, it says he goes into his private quarters, which I think is very interesting. He goes like deep into the keep, into his own room by himself. And it says that he sits quietly and contemplates this, and something shifts in him. And he goes and he sees the Tathagata, and the Tathagata could see that something changed. And because the Tathagata, when a being has been awakened in this way, they can see the lives of other beings very clearly, their past and future lives. And so she says to him, she says, oh, in a future life, you will give birth to a great vow, and you will become the Buddha Amitabha, who establishes a Western Pure Land in which all beings are invited. All beings are invited to that Pure Land of Amida Buddha, so that they can live a life of awakening and become Buddhas themselves. When we hear a story like that, we may think, you know, the king really got it once they got the teaching about not doing things to produce good results. I mean, that's how the story reads, right? Is doing, you know, veneration practice, that's good. We should all do that. I'm encouraging you. But in this story, the Buddha says, you know, not totally getting it. If the king wants to find the real path, the king needs to give up this grasping after good effects. And then the Buddha goes, the king goes to his inner chamber and contemplates and has awakening experience. So we think everything that happens after the awakening experience, that's the what we should be paying attention to. The reason I told this story is because we should be paying attention to the whole thing. What are the good results that you deeply, deeply want? And how are you seeking them? If the king had not done that, the king could never come to the place of having the realization of universal awakening and becoming Amida Buddha. The fear that I have for the world is that we won't learn to truly desire the good results, not just for myself, but for all beings. That we be satisfied with what shows up to me as being good, and that I can simply clamp down on it. That's the definition of good, what I view as good. That's my fear. And so, I don't know how much sense I'm making here, but I want to encourage you. This great vehicle teaching is not something that can be grasped with the mind. It is the mind. It is every encounter is full of meaning, is full of the opportunity to find the significance of a step on the path. And we don't need to wait. We don't need to wait for the place that is just right. We need to live out the mysterious great vehicle by seeking. By relinquishing the self-view. By becoming intimate with our own defilement. Not so that we can weed it out or, torch it, but so that we can see right within our own grasping mind, right within our own deep desire. There is the mind that knows that whatever it is that I long for, it is not simply my heart as a lone individual that longs for this. It is all my sisters and brothers in human and non-human forms. They also have this same heart. They also are this same heart. How will I care for them? It means I also have to care for this multifaceted, ungraspable me.